What's going on YouTube? It's Teach, back again with another video, and today coming at you with my quarterback tier ranking, focusing on the NFC side. Tomorrow we'll come back for the AFC side, and then I'll also put all the quarterbacks together from today's rankings, tomorrow's rankings, so that way you can see where I think the entire NFL landscape is at. But hopefully you guys enjoyed. Be sure to hit the like button if you do. It seriously helps me in the channel out a ton. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, want to see more football content, and let me hear your quarterback rankings down below in the comments section. You know, where would you tier these NFC quarterbacks? How many elite QBs there are? Where do you think the rookies kind of fit in the mix? I gave them their own tier, but I'd love to hear where you think they will rank. And also, one more note. Once we get very close to week 1 and we know all the week 1 starters, I will do another version of this and basically rank 1 through 32, my starting week 1 quarterback rankings. So I'm going to continue to do this. And also one more note of housekeeping before we get started. I already plan on doing a few other tier rankings throughout the rest of the offseason, you know, best offenses, best defenses, but if y'all want to see more things like best pass rush units, you know, best receiving cores, best run games, things like that, if you basically want subcategories of the best offense, best defense tier rankings, definitely let me know down below in the comment section and I will bring it your way. But like I said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Also, thank you to BetUS for today's sponsoring today's video. All their information is down below in the description. But like I said, we're only focusing on the NFC side, so I got to find my first NFC starter, and it is Baker Mayfield. I'm going to put Baker in the below average starter. I once was a pretty big Baker Mayfield believer. I had Josh Allen as the #1 quarterback in 2018, but I still saw a lot of promise in Baker Mayfield, and you know, he's had a couple of years, really. He's had one full year and another half season when Freddie Kitchens, took over as the OC and Greg Williams was the interim head coach, where he showed a little something. But in the grand scheme of his entire career, it has been mostly rough, to say the least, and put it lightly. So in the grand scheme of things, I think he falls under that below average starter tier. And also just kind of detailing this, I mean, I think they're kind of self-explanatory, but elite, obviously there's elite quarterbacks, really good with sprinkles of elite. There's the guys that are right there on the fringe, that, QB 10 to 8 range for the most part. Good, but need a good supporting cast. That's kind of self-explanatory. I think about Nick Foles in the Super Bowl run, Joe Flacco in his Super Bowl run. Average starter, that's, again, self-explanatory. Young and unproven, this is going to be rookies and second-year guys that we just don't have a big enough sample on. Below average starter, and then backup. So apologies, should have done that off the top. But yeah, Baker, I think, is degressed or gone down into that below average starter tier. All right, next NFC quarterback I see is Derek Carr. I'm going to put Derek Carr in the good but needs a good supporting cast, and also as we go along, I will shift these guys and put them in order, so you will also get my NFC quarterback rankings essentially out of today's video. But yeah, Carr's good. Did he take a step back last year with McDaniels? Yes. Do I think that offense is a big reason why? Yes. I think the scheme change was a big catalyst for that, because otherwise, you look at Darren Waller, yes, he missed time, but even Moreau, who's a solid backup tight end, Josh Jacobs is coming off a career year, Devontae Adams first year in Las Vegas. There's a lot of reasons for why Derek Carr should have been better than he was last year, but there were a handful of games. I think about that Steelers game, and in that game against the Steelers, he just did not look like the guy he was 2 years ago when it was him and then interim head coach Rich Bisaccia, who somehow took the Raiders into the playoffs. And that was one of the best years of Carr's career. And obviously he had the injury in 2016. He looked like a stud in the making then. But yeah, he's been up and down. But I think with the good environment around him in New Orleans, he'll firmly cement himself in this good but needs a good supporting cast, which I think he has in New Orleans. Good running backs, solid offensive line, a lot of pass catchers. So I'm optimistic about him in New Orleans. But that being said, especially after last year, he has lost some of maybe my I don't want to say respect, but he's lost a little bit of points in these rankings. All right, then we get to Matt Corral. He's going to go in the young but unproven, but almost assuredly he's going to be the last guy in that ranking. He's a second-year guy, so I mean, who knows? But in the grand scheme of things, I wasn't overly high on Matt Corral, and he comes from a weak quarterback class, and fell to the third round. And yeah, I'm not really in the Matt Carroll believer business. So Corral, I think, is just going to be a backup for years to come, and that makes sense. You could also put him in the backup tier, and I wouldn't argue with you there. Then we get to Dak Prescott, and I'm a pretty big Dak Prescott guy. I'll say really good with sprinkles of elite. Now, I'm not saying he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league or anything like that, especially once we see the AFC version of this video. He'll be in that QB, again, 10-ish range. range. But I think Dak does a lot right. He has a couple of weird games where he's really off. I think about that Washington game at the end of last season, but he's a really cerebral player. Love what he does at the line of scrimmage. Mostly accurate, pretty good arm, enough mobility. I think he does enough right to garner being in this really good with sprinkles of elite tier. All right, then we get to Andy Dalton. I actually don't mind Andy Dalton. I'm going to put him in the backup tier, but he was coming off a solid year of, kind of spot starting for New Orleans. So I think he's fine to be a starter, but he'd probably go in the below average starter. And to be honest with you, once we get through this, as I've already mapped it out for the NFC side, you could probably make an argument that he's in the top, the below average starter tier. But I think at this point in his career, it's probably most fair to assess him as a backup. And the same could be said about the next guy we're going to talk about, Sam Darnold. I have never been a big Sam Darnold believer. I'm sure this year in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan, he's going to have, moments. Maybe he starts week 1 over Trey Lance. Who knows? And in that Shanahan offense, he'll look like the guy that maybe people thought he would be coming out as a top 3 pick. But yeah, I think at this point we have a big enough sample size between 2 different locations, 2 different coaching staffs, and 2 different offenses for that matter, where he just didn't look good. I mean, and there's games. I think he has talent because you see it for 1, 2, 3 game stretches, but over a large enough sample size, Sam Darnold regresses to his mean, and his mean is just, to me, a backup caliber quarterback. So, yeah, apologies for those Sam Darnold believers, but I am definitely not one of them. Then we get to Daniel Jones. I'll put him in the average starter tier, and this is going to piss off a ton of Giants fans. We'll see. I mean, I'm not saying he can't get better this upcoming season. Who knows? Maybe he does take another step forward, and he moves himself from the good but needs a good supporting cast tier. You could even sell me on that as of right now. But he's coming off the best year of his career, and even then, it was fine. It was good enough. Their point differential didn't really match up with them being a playoff team. I think a lot of credit has to go to Brian Daboll, as well as the change in the front office and some of the small moves and stealing percentage points, finding a way to get incrementally better, and finding, again, those corners you can cut, kind of like the great GMs, like a Brad Holmes and what Bill Belichick has done with New England and what the Bills have done with Brandon Beane. I think Joe Shane has already started to implement some of that in Buffalo, and I think a lot of that kind of trickles down and makes Daniel Jones have a better situation and in turn look better. Also, Brian Daboll took advantage of his rushing ability a lot more, and I think that was a big part of it as well. So we'll see this year. He's got Darren Waller. He's got a few more weapons to work with. If he takes another step forward, specifically as a passer, he could easily move up another tier. But, as of right now, I think he firmly puts himself in that average starter category. All right, next, Justin Fields. He's young and unproven, but he is going to be one of the top names in this category because I am optimistic about what Justin Fields will look like this season. He was the number 3 player on my big board back in 2021, right behind Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson. One of those two looks a lot better than the other, but I still think that Justin Fields is going to look a lot better this year, especially now he's got a number 1 wide receiver, DJ Moore. They've patched up that offensive line. I am projecting here, but I do think at the top end of young and unproven, I could easily see by the end of the season him put him in that good but needs a good supporting cast tier, because at that point, we will have seen that is when Justin Fields is the best, when he has DJ Moore, when the offensive line repaired. But who knows? Maybe he takes a huge step forward and moves into the really good sprinkles of elite. Maybe he just goes so far as joining the elite tier. Time will tell there, but right now, obviously, he falls under young and unproven. Next, Geno Smith. I'm going to go with good, but needs a good supporting cast, given that it took a situation in Seattle where they have 2 clear-cut, really good wide receivers, Metcalf plus Lockett, good run game. The offensive line mostly held up last year. Now, it is interesting how much better he did look versus Russell Wilson. Situations have to be taken into context there, but it was good to see Geno Smith take that step forward. And hey, if he backs it up and does it for a second year, you could maybe sell me on an argument to where he's the top of this tier and maybe flirt with the good with sprinkles of elite. Because there were definitely moments last year where it's like, dude, Geno Smith is playing like a top 10 quarterback. I don't think that's sustained for the entire season. Maybe ultimately by the year's end, he's just outside that top 10 conversation, maybe right there at 10. But all in all, considering the leap that he took last year, I think this is a good spot for him to be, considering every other year before this, he's firmly in the backup tier. So a huge step forward there for Geno Smith. Then we get to Jared Goff. I'm going to put him in the front of the average starter tier because that's exactly what I view Jared Goff as. The problem is he is an average player making great money, and that's kind of where my issue lies with Jared Goff. But just as a signal caller, good at the line of scrimmage, throws a pretty ball, has good enough arm, fairly accurate, not the most mobile, but he has it in his back pocket when push comes to shove. So I think he's good. I think he's fine. Now, again, the price tag is more my issue. But if you were a team that's, I think back to Ryan Fitzpatrick when he signed with Washington. They gave him a 1-year, $10 million deal. If a team signed Jared Goff for that, I'd be like, man, that's a pretty solid value. It's more so when he's pushing, mid-upper 30s and then flirting with $40 range where it's like, I can't justify Jared Goff being anywhere near the conversation of $40 million annually. So, if you got him on that mid-tier quarterback contract, the $20-ish million range, he's not a bad player. Anything more than that, then it's like, I don't know about that. Anyways, then we get to Taylor Heineke. He stays in the NFC. He's a backup, sorry. I know there's a lot of Heineke believers. I am not one of them. I have had enough Taylor Heineke starting games for my lifetime, honestly. I'm ready to see other guys. I just don't think Taylor Heineke's getting any better, and he's kind of a gimmick quarterback. He's a scrappy guy, and there's only so much before eventually a lack of top-end talent catches up with you. No disrespect. He goes to, we went to ODU. I respect my Virginia Commonwealth, brethren, I guess you could say. But, I just don't think he's all that good. Anyways, let's move on now, and we get to Hendon Hooker. He'll go in the young and unproven tier, just ahead of Matt Corral. He was my QB6 this last year, but he's kind of in a position where he's in line to be the future quarterback for Detroit. And again, like I said with Jared Goff, when he's making that high-end money, I don't love it, but if he's making cheap money, I'm fine with it. And I didn't love Hendon Hooker as a prospect, but I could see where he's NFL ready by year 2, and him on a rookie contract allows you to be very, very competitive in division that's up for grabs. So excited to see what Hooker develops into. Next, Sam Howell. He's going to go in the young and unproven. I'll put him just ahead of Hooker, partially because he's got a year of experience, so naturally it just feels like he's probably a little bit further along in that. But also he's my QB2 in that 2022 draft class. That said, the caveat being that entire QB class was not one I was super excited about. So I just basically put the 2 upside-based players at the top. Malik Willis had the highest ceiling, so he was 1. Sam Howell right behind him, he was 2 for that reason. And then you get to Desmond Ridder, who I thought was the most NFL ready, then Kenny Pickett, and then Matt Corral. But yeah, it just wasn't a great quarterback class. But I am intrigued to see what Howell does in year 2. And, in the one game we got to see him play against Dallas, it was kind of a whatever game for the Cowboys. But we saw the mobility, saw enough arm strength, we saw some accuracy. There's enough things to kind of keep me interested. After this upcoming season, either he's going to plummet behind this and he'll be a backup, or there might be enough there to where he becomes this average starter. He kind of lives in the range of 28 to 32, and maybe, just maybe, if he plays really, really well, he moves himself from that good with a good supporting cast type of tier. But I'm excited to see what Sam Howell is all about. Jalen Hurts, this is our lone elite quarterback. Now, granted, this isn't going to be for everybody, and you stack him up against the AFC elite that we'll talk about tomorrow, and he's probably towards the bottom of that bunch. But I've always been a big Jalen Hurts fan. If you've been around the channel for the length of its existence, dating back 2.5 years ago, basically the start of COVID, I've always been a pretty big Jalen Hurts believer. All we've seen him do is get better and better. From Alabama to Oklahoma, got better. Oklahoma to his first year in Philly. In those 4 games, we got to see him start. Got better. Those 4 games to first full year as a starter. Got better. That first full season as a starter to last year. Improved substantially. I think he's a guy that's done nothing but get better and better and better. And I think that work ethic, plus there was more talent than I think a lot of people wanted to give him credit for, has eventually caught up. And now I do put him in that elite tier, but that may be high for others. But I'm a big Jalen Hurts believer. Next, Jimmy Garoppolo is actually in the AFC, so I was really close to putting him on the list. Used to seeing him in the NFC. Still got the 49ers jersey here on the tier list ranker. But anyways, we move on then to Kirk Cousins. He obviously goes in the good but needs good supporting cast. I'll put him just ahead of Derek Carr, just because I do like Cousins a little bit more than Carr. But yeah, Kirk Cousins, this song has been sung by so many different people. You know what he is. He's fine. He's good enough. And when you live in a world where maybe you're rolling out with a Sam Howell or, whatever, Kirk Cousins looks pretty damn good. Now, that's a tough situation because we're talking about Washington. He obviously comes from Washington, but you get the gist of it. If you're starting a below-average quarterback, you're like, man, if we could only get Kirk Cousins, we'd be so much better. That's basically what the Vikings did after making the NFC Championship with Case Keenum. But then when it comes to winning a Super Bowl, Kirk Cousins gets you in that playoff conversation, but does he take you to that next step further? We haven't seen it yet. And really, they haven't made it as far as they did with Case Keenum. And part of that's because you got to pay Kirk. So that's money that's not going to loading up wide receiver, edge, corner, and all that stuff. So the Vikings roster has taken a step back because they had to pay Kirk Cousins. And that's kind of the awkward land you live when you have these mid-tier quarterbacks. So I think Kirk Cousins is fine. He's coming off a pretty solid season. But I just don't know if he's good enough to take you to the promised land. So therefore, he goes in this good, but needs strong supporting cast. Now, if the Vikings had an Eagles-esque, well-rounded, super deep roster, I think he could. But Minnesota doesn't really have that luxury. Anyways, then we get to Kyler Murray. I'll put Kyler at the top of good but needs good supporting cast. We'll find out. If he plays this year, we're going to see what he looks like with a bad roster. But to this point, he's had, competent offensive players around him, right? Cliff Kingsbury did a lot to keep that offensive line clean. He's always had at least a running back that was solid. He's had DeAndre Hopkins for a good portion of his time in Arizona. Then he got Hollywood Brown last year. They also invested in Rondale Moore, just to name a few. And then tight end heavily in the 2022 draft as well. So he's always had decent enough weapons around him. And I still like Kyler Murray. Now, whatever you think about him as a player, as someone who's addicted to Call of Duty, I guess, and maybe the leadership side of it, that's, I'm not in the locker room, so I can't really speak to that. Doesn't seem like he is like the most outspoken Jalen Hurts-esque type of leader. But, as a football player, I think he's really, really solid. So I got to put him here at least in the good, but needs good supporting cast here. And he will be the top of this tier. But I honestly thought about moving him right next to Dak Prescott because I think the talent's there. It just, everyone has different opinions about him as a person, maybe. Then we get to the next one here, Jordan Love, man. So he's obviously going to go in the young but unproven tier. And I'm going to put him just behind Justin Fields. I think if you were to ask me, hey, TJ, you're inheriting a franchise and your two quarterback options are Jordan Love going into year 4 or Justin Fields going into year 3. I think I'd take Fields, so I'll give him the edge here, but I did really like Jordan Love as a prospect coming out of Utah State. I think there's a lot of tools and traits there. The sample size is just so small and also looked really rough against the Chiefs 2 years ago. Then we get to see him against Philadelphia, and he looks a whole lot better. I think the Chiefs had a lot to play for that game. By the time he sees the Eagles last year, the Eagles were up double digits. So I think that context is also something that needs to be taken note. Does that change how those two teams are playing Jordan Love? I think it does. But yeah, I'm really interested to see. He could easily jump up a handful of tiers here, but he also could prove to be a not very good replacement for Aaron Rodgers, becomes this, backup quarterback long-term, and Green Bay's in the quarterback market next offseason. It could break out in a lot of different ways. Right now, he goes in that young and unproven just behind Justin Fields for me. All right, next NFC quarterback. Now I got to do some digging. We get Brock Purdy. Man, Purdy's a tough one. I'll put him behind Jordan Love and ahead of Sam Howell. My quarterback rankings, I had Howell ahead of Purdy, so should I stick to my eval? I kind of feel like I should, but Purdy is at least a winner, and we have only seen one game of Sam Howell. So bigger sample size, give Purdy the edge there. And I don't know if necessarily he's gone above and beyond, yes, he's Mr. Relevant, won games, reached the NFC Championship game, but you give a lot of young quarterbacks, Kyle Shanahan, that supporting cast, that defense, that still had DeMeco Ryans as the DC. There's a reason to believe a lot of quarterbacks would look pretty good. I mean, like I said earlier, you're going to start hearing Sam Darnold hype and love during camp, and if he starts during the regular season at any point, you're going to hear it then because Kyle Shanahan's going to have him looking pretty good, and I think Brock Purdy kind of benefits from some of that. All right, next NFC quarterback I see is Desmond Ridder. He's obviously also going to go in the young but unproven tier. Potentially unpopular opinion, I will put him behind Sam Howell. I like Howell more as a prospect than Ridder. Ridder did get to play a couple more games, but I'm a little more optimistic and excited about the upside of Howell versus what I think Ridder's upside is. But obviously, we just have not seen enough of either one of these guys. So fight me and tell me why I'm wrong in the comments. I'd love to hear why you believe Ridder's going to be better than Howell. You may well be right, and only time will tell that story. But I think I'm more optimistic and I'm more excited to see Sam Howell versus Ridder. So that's maybe why I rank them like I do. Then next, NFC quarterback, Matt Stafford. I'm going to put him just between Kyler Murray and Kirk Cousins. Again, I think he's good, but needs a good supporting cast. We kind of saw that in the Super Bowl run. And, going back to right after the season, right after Stafford got that ring, he was in the really good with sprinkles of elite tier because that's truly how I judged him. Here I'm accounting for he's coming off the elbow injury, missed a lot of time last year. Is he going to be that same guy? Plus, he's 2 years older since he won a Super Bowl. So, I think Father Time plus the injury aspect of it has kind of dinged him down at least one tier. And you could honestly sell me an argument that he should go behind all the quarterbacks here in the good but needs good supporting cast here, just because we don't know what he's going to look like post-injury. But I do think this is the right grouping for him, at least at this point in his career. All right, next NFC quarterback is going to be Kyle Trask. And, sorry, we haven't seen him play yet, but I'm going ahead and making an assumption here. Below average starter. This might be, a leap too far. And actually seeing this, feel like I got to put Andy Dalton here in the below average starter tier, and I'll just move him up to the top of that tier because I would rather have Dalton maybe for 17 games over these other two guys. Baker, we'll see with the upside, and maybe he does take a step forward and figures it out, and Tampa Bay is the right spot for him. He's got those wide receivers. Maybe. You could tell me on Baker being ahead of Dalton, but yeah, I'll definitely take Dalton over Kyle Trask if we're talking about one of these two guys starting for 17 games. I'd rather just deal with the devil I do know in Andy Dalton versus the devil I don't, and I'm not too optimistic about Kyle Trask. It feels like Tampa Bay has done everything in their power to avoid starting Kyle Trask, and I feel like that signals a lot about how they feel about his development so far. Then we get to Trey Lance. This is a tough one. I'm going to put him just ahead of Matt Corral, but behind Hendon Hooker. Because at this point, if you were to, again, ask me, TJ, would you rather have rookie Hendon Hooker or year 3 Trey Lance? I'll say, give me the guy with a bigger, rookie contract window. I don't know what either one of these guys are going to be, but I want the guy with 4 years of cheap contract versus 2 more. And Lance also comes with the injury questions, and, it's been so long since we've seen him play football in general, college or NFL. And also when he played in college, it was at a smaller school versus Hooker, looking pretty good in the SEC. An inflated offense at Tennessee and Josh Heupel's offense, but at least he played in the SEC. So, yeah, I'll put Lance just behind Hooker, and how the mighty have fallen. I thought the 49ers made the right call with taking him at pick 3. Well, I would have gone with Justin Fields, but in a world between Mac Jones, Trey Lance, who would you take at 3? I was pounding the table saying it should be Trey Lance, go for the upside, but in hindsight, I think Mac Jones would be even better in San Francisco, and I think San Francisco would just have an upgraded Brock Purdy had they taken Mac Jones. So hindsight's 2020, and give credit to San Francisco. They are already kind of moving on from Trey Lance, and as opposed to sitting and sulking in that potential mistake. So it kind of sucks putting Lance where he is, but yeah, we just haven't seen him, and when we have, it really hasn't inspired a whole lot of confidence. And again, 4 years of Hooker versus 2 of Lance. I'll take the 4 years of a cheap quarterback versus 2. Then the next NFC quarterback, I think we only have one more, and it is Bryce Young. I will put him at the top of the young but unproven tier. And then, guys, I think that does it for my NFC tier ranking. Only one elite guy, Jalen Hurts. Only one really good with sprinkles of elite. You could convince me Kyler Murray should be in there, and I had Matt Stafford there a couple years ago, but obviously things have changed with Stafford with the injury, and then Kyler Murray's going to miss some time this year, and also the leadership questions. This is maybe me baking that in. A couple guys in the average starter tier, Goff and Daniel Jones. Maybe Jones should be moved up a tier. A lot of young and unproven. The NFC has the ability to catch up the AFC if a lot of these guys work out. Like if Justin Fields takes that step forward, if Bryce Young lives up to number 1 overall selection, if Jordan Love is better than some people are anticipating. It may not have as many elite tier guys as there's going to be in tomorrow's video for the AFC, but there might end up being a lot more of these good but needs good supporting casting, really good with sprinkles of elite guys that the AFC doesn't have, and therefore kind of balances itself out. And then a handful of below average starters and the guys I perceive as backups. But just double checking myself now, I believe, yes, that is all the NFC quarterbacks in this ranking. If I realize that I made a mistake, I will put a note somewhere here to just point out that I'm fucked up. And then I will put them into the entire quarterback ranking, which will be at the end of tomorrow's AFC quarterback tier ranking video. But let me hear your thoughts down below. Where's your favorite quarterback? What tier would you put your guy into? And also, how many elite quarterbacks do you think the NFC has? Do you think Jalen Hurts even falls into that category? If not, is there an elite quarterback in the NFC? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. But hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hit that like button. Seriously helps me and the channel out a ton. And subscribe if you're new, want to see more football content, and enjoyed what you saw today. That's going to do it for me. Come back tomorrow for the AFC version of this video. But until then, my name is Teach, and I'm signing off.